Okay, our first guests as part of the Brexit Clinic are the Road Haulage Association, who are hosting their autumn conference. The industry is going to be massively affected by Brexit in terms of supply chains, custom controls and the controlling of lorry movements. 5Live's Nick Garnett is at the conference with them. Nick, good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon. The RHA is really the voice of Britain's haulage industry, and that voice, frankly, is getting a little bit hoarse talking about Brexit. The message has gone out loud and clear here, though, that Brexit could happen in 20 working days' time. Now, at one point today, the RHA's policy director held up a sheet of paper detailing what he knew about the government's plans for Northern Ireland. It was a blank piece of paper. Outside the conference is a British-built, I have to say that, a British-built government lorry. It's towing an exhibition trailer called Get Ready for Brexit, and staff in high visibility jackets are handing out leaflets to try and help with Brexit planning. But how do you plan for an event that seems to change 5 times a day? I have no idea. And that's why we've launched the Brexit Clinic, really. Maybe we'll find a cure for it. With me and to talk to you is Richard Burnett, the Chief Executive of the RHA, who is taking on the weight of Britain's hauliers on his shoulders. Rob Holliman is from Young's Transportation. They've got over 100 trucks running through mainland Europe and the UK. And Paul Abbott of Knights of Old, and they transport 2.5 million pallets to the EU each year. An awful lot of business, an awful lot of things, and they've got an awful lot of questions and problems with Brexit.
I bet they have. I'll start with Richard. Good afternoon, Richard.
Good afternoon.
Thanks for joining us.
How are you?
I'm good, Richard, but then, of course, I'm, just a radio broadcaster, and I carry on regardless, talking about this stuff. It's your members, of course, that are right at the coalface of this, aren't they? I mean, what is your reaction to the Prime Minister's Brexit plan, Richard?
I guess one of concern, one of confusion. I think when these plans roll out, they're more principles than real plans. We work to plans, we work to detail, and there's no detail within really what he's talking about. And I guess this is really going to work in principle, and this is also built around a technological solution which also isn't built yet. So what does that solution look like? How is it going to work? How is this going to be implemented? And, what do we need to plan for? Every time government talk about these principles, we have no clarity over what that looks like.
So when you send an email to government to try and doorstep Grant Shapps, the Transport Minister, to try and find out what's going on, and his predecessors, how much information do you get, Richard?
Yeah. Well, we're heavily involved in roundtable discussions with government. Previously that's been under NDA. Those NDAs have been lifted now, non-disclosure agreements.
That's interesting.
So we're talking about the same issues. This is about clarity over the customs process. It's clarity over, how are all of these things going to work? How are we going to communicate, not just to hauliers, but, it's the traders, it's the businesses that need to provide hauliers with the documentation and the paperwork. And if we go back, 25, 30 years, we had customs agents in place then. Dover, for instance, had 500 custom agents companies. It's now got 15. There were 1 million loads, back then when we were having to carry out customs documentation. There's now 4.5 million. So we've lost all the experience. We've lost all the knowledge. Filling out your customs declaration is like filling out your tax return for the first time. Who do you go to? Who do you go and talk to if you haven't got somebody, that provides you with that information? Well, there's nobody. That's quite simply the case. And it's not just about business in the UK. It's also about all of those European businesses that also need to prepare and get ready for the change in the customs process. And when I've spent that time over in Europe at the moment, they simply don't seem to be gearing up fast enough for these changes. And we talked about it before, 20 working days until potentially no deal Brexit. That's really concerning. It's really worrying for all of us.
When you are in a conversation with someone who says it'll be all right, it'll work itself out, project fear, etc., how do you respond?
Yeah.
Because you do hear a lot of that. When anyone puts forward something, put someone quite concrete, these are our concrete issues, and then some politician will kind of say, it's fine, don't worry, don't worry about it, it'll work itself out, and then they'll say things like, we're a strong nation and we'll da-da-da-da,
Yeah, look, I get that. So I've been in logistics and distribution for 35 years. I've been through lots of startups, and I've borne the scars of those startups right the way through my career. In terms of our membership, we have both Brexiteers and we have Remainers within our membership. So we have to be impartial in terms of everything we do, everything we say. We have to support both sides. So what we have to do is we have to spell out operationally what's the impact of these changes, in terms of what does it mean, the different handshakes, the different, touch points that businesses have to adapt and change to, and how do you actually train those out? And the principle, if I go back to all of the transport, warehousing, and logistics operations that I've started up, each of those has been a startup where you have to train everybody. You have to train everybody at the same time to make sure they're ready and available for those changes. And where I've done that, that's usually maybe 500-600 people in one site, where you're having to do that maybe over a year in preparation for a new startup. We're talking about having to train 250,000 businesses all at the same time, with a change in process and system, without the real knowledge and skills and clarity over that process. So this isn't scaremongering. This is practically saying, look, when you're adapting to those changes, if people don't know what they're doing, when they get to the borders, when they get to the crossings, and they have to bring paperwork to be checked, are they bringing have they got the right paperwork? Have they got the right things with them? How long does it take to do that? These are all the basic principles. We're not trying to scaremonger. We're just saying, look, that takes time. When people are learning, it takes even longer. And we're changing everything literally, with the flick of a switch overnight.
Okay, so then what? Because I can understand what keeps you up all night. What is it that helps you sleep soundly at night then? Because from what you're telling me, your basis of working with companies and startups and what it requires in order to bring people up to speed, there is no possible way that you will be ready in days with 250,000 businesses. I don't quite see how you could do that.
I thought, look, you're absolutely right. I wouldn't say I'm getting the best night's sleep at the moment. I haven't probably had the best night's sleep for the last 3 years, to be absolutely frank. But the point with all of this is it's what you end up believing, isn't it? It's what's going to end up happening here. We can all see a plan A, and we're gearing up for a plan A, which is, we've got to crash out the EU at the end of the month without a deal. And both sides are kind of saying, look, it's all part of the big negotiation, isn't it? But is there a plan B where actually the plan B is we are going to relax on both sides in Europe and the UK if we get there, what these processes and systems look like? Because the reality is we're going to see queues, we're going to see problems, at the borders, if we have to do the level of checking that we're talking about. And, you then get into disaster recovery, which is, the supply chain in the UK, business, manufacturing, retailers are all gearing up for just in time. And it's a bit like squeezing a kind of hose pipe, isn't it? If you strangle the flow of water, it turns out to be a trickle. Well, that's a bit like the Calais Straits. And, if that flow isn't flowing into the supply chain in the UK, it's going to affect secondary distribution. It's also going to affect retail and manufacturing, and that's jobs. So, these are worrying times, but it really does depend on whether or not this is just negotiating tactics to get the EU to come to the table and we find a deal on the steps at the 11th hour, or whether or not there is going to be some sort of relaxation on both sides if it all crashes and fails.
Let's speak to Rob Holliman now from Young's Transportation. Thank you to Richard Burnett. Please do stay with us, Richard, as well, Chief Executive of the Road Haulage Association.